is a recording to support the Aberystwyth University module CS12320, programming using an object-oriented language. Depending on who you are and when you view this, then you may have already been given some template JavaFX code as part of an assignment. Maybe not. So the purpose is just to provide a quick overview of the JavaFX graphical user interface framework. So there are going to be some slides, but mostly it's going to be typing in code, and you can follow along and also type in when I type in. So JavaFX is the preferred GUI framework instead of Swing. The Swing framework for Java has been around since the late 90s. JavaFX, I think, is a lot nicer. Swing is still supported, and there are lots and lots of applications out there that use it, but I think JavaFX is the way to go. It has very nice support for CSS3 and HTML5 and so on. So that from that point of view, it's really quite a lot better than Swing. But we're only going to scratch the surface during this presentation. For a more complete picture, please take a look at this link here. And there are lots of other tutorials online too you might want to look at. So just to start off, before we look at any code, just to provide a little bit on the architecture of JavaFX. Right at the top here we have the API that we use from our code. Our code would essentially be up here using the JavaFX public APIs and scene graph. So a whole bunch of libraries that we can use, and we'll be seeing some of those in action later. Just to say something about this scene graph, it's a hierarchical tree of nodes that represent all the visual elements that you see displayed in the graphical user interface. For those of you who have played around with HTML5, HTML in general, and CSS, you'll know that there's a document object model supported in browsers, which is a kind of hierarchy of the elements that you see displayed. And this is a scene graph is something very similar. Tend to use in JavaFX terminology from theatre, so the current scene being displayed on a stage. So there's sort of a graph of components that make up what you're going to see as part of a scene that's currently being displayed on the stage. And so you can imagine there might be a grid, and there is a grid, what's called a grid container, and as an example, and that might have a whole bunch of buttons in that grid, which you can then press. And you can have containers within containers in a hierarchical form, and there are various kinds of what we call panes, these containers that allow you to represent bottom level nodes such as buttons and menus and text input fields in various ways, and we'll see some of that later on. Under the JavaFX API, there's this quantum toolkit. I'll come back to that in a second, but under that we have Prism and some other things, Glass and so on. So Prism, as it says down here, is rasterization and rendering of the scene. So rasterization is taking the vector graphic representation of shapes and converting those into pixels to be displayed, and then rendering those on a display. Quantum then kind of presents Prism and this glass windowing toolkit. Just to say, Quantum takes these and presents them in a useful way to the API above, the JavaFX API. So Glass gives us access to the native operating system windowing services. So it's the components that you have in JavaFX are actually quite thin in the sense that you quickly go out into the native operating system, windowing system components quite quickly, and it means that what you get and what you see is very much in the form, look and feel of the native windowing system for the operating system you're dealing with. If it's Windows or if it's macOS and so on, it looks like macOS and it looks like Windows. It doesn't look like some Java specific thing. So Glass Windowing Toolkit is handling things like clicks and so on that are then passed through to the underlying JavaFX. The media engine there supports visual and audio inputs and outputs, so MP3, AIF, WAV, FLV, but not all of the codecs, only a subset. And then for displaying HTML and CSS, we have the web engine part, which is based on WebKit, and you know that a whole bunch of browsers out there actually support WebKit as the rendering engine, and that is true also of JavaFX. And then all of this sits on top of the standard JDK API libraries and tools. I forgot to mention we also have over here support for 2D graphics, 3D graphics, and OpenGL standard. And there's the Java Virtual Machine at the bottom there. Something that we won't be using in this presentation, but you may want to use over time, is the JavaFX Scene Builder. So you can think about the model view controller design pattern, where you have the view separated from the controller, which handles the events, and the sort of the model code, which deals with the non-GUI stuff, possibly represents some data structure or talks to an underlying database. You can think of those being separated out, and what the Scene Builder does is it gives you a way of representing the view, the way you want to represent components, using XML, and in this case it's FXML. Version 2 is the latest, and there's this Scene Builder tool that allows you to drag and drop and create the user interfaces, which will then generate the FXML, which in turn will then be used to generate code, be interpreted at runtime. We will actually write the code that creates the user interface directly. One of the advantages of that is that you then know what goes on under the covers, and also sometimes you can get strange errors that occur when using FXML that are difficult to debug. If you've got written the code yourself, at least you can see precisely what's going on. Okay, so what we need to do now, of course, is create a program, and the first program we always create is a HelloWorld program, JavaFX style in this case. So this is what it's going to look like. I'm using a Mac, hence the style of user interface you're seeing here. I'm going to be using IntelliJ, but you could use Eclipse or NetBeans or something else. I'm going to create a Java project called JavaFx Hello. So because this talk is targeted at students at the Aberystwyth University CS123 module, the information, just to say that the information for those listeners, the information services PCs that we have should just have access to JavaFX. Shouldn't be any problem, it should just be there, the library. And that's true also of most operating systems, certainly was on my Mac. Those who are using OpenJDK rather than the Oracle SDK on OpenJDK on Linux, then this will not be the case, and you will need to get hold of JavaFX. There are some instructions, and again this is directed at students at Aberystwyth on Blackboard, so you can look on Blackboard, and there is some information there that will help you find the JavaFX that you need for OpenJDK. I mean, there are tutorials online that explain how to do this too. So we're going to start by creating a JavaFX class. So I'm going to actually just switch over to IntelliJ now and create a new project. So you can follow along, and should we call JavaFX Hello and put that somewhere sensible. JavaFX Hello folder there, and finish that. Okay, and let's put some code in here. So I'm going to create a class. So you might want to follow along here. And we'll call this Hello World. This class, I won't put it in a package, we'll just have it in the default package to keep things simple. And the thing that turns this into a JavaFX application is to say extends application. And you can actually see here that I'm being prompted for that. So if I do that, it also imports the appropriate class from JavaFX application package. And you notice it's in red here. It's forcing me to create a method called start method. So we can get, let's put that in, type it in. So public void start stage. Okay, we need to import this, so we can do that. So there we are, there's the import. We also need a main method in here as normal, public static void main string array args. And the only thing we need to do from here is to say launch. So this will actually start up the JavaFX program. We don't have to create an object ourselves of the Hello World. Launch will result in an object of Hello World being created and start method being run in a different thread. So a different thread from the main thread, the GUI thread that JavaFX is going to be using. So stage, as I was saying earlier on, we use the language of the theatre. And we also already mentioned, having a scene, and a scene is placed on a stage, so the theatre stage. So we'll be doing something with that. So I'm just going to put a comment in here where we create our GUI. So this is where we kick things off in terms of our GUI. I'll just put in a default constructor here. You don't have to put this in, but just to show that actually if there's stuff that you do want to do as part of a constructor, then you can do that there. Okay, going back to the slides. See if there's anything else I've said here. No, let's move on to the next slide. So what we want to do now, and you can actually copy this code from Pastebin if you want, if you don't want to type it all in, is create a label, which is going to be our message to display. Add a little title to the top of the window to say what the window is about, and then use what's called a layout manager. It's a container, a pane, what we call a pane in JavaFX. And this particular kind, the stack pane, allows you to stack one component on top of another component, one node on top of another. And we'll see how that works as we go along. I'm going to call this root, and what you need to do then is to get the children of root, so-called get children. At the moment this is going to be empty, and we're going to add our first child to this container, to this pane, which is going to be the message, the label up here. Then we're going to create a new scene that's going to be added to the stage, and the scene is going to be of a certain size, 700 pixels by 250 pixels in size, and we provide the root, the pane, to form part of that scene, which then gets added to the stage. And then we raise the curtain to show that. Just to say up here that the font size up here is essentially, we're talking about pixels here, CSS pixels, 100 CSS pixels. It's a little bit more complicated than that, depending on the coordinate system we're using and whether we scale things or not, but we haven't in this case. We're just doing the default stuff. Okay, so let's type all of this in. Back to the program, start typing that in. So this is all going to happen in here, in start. So label, we're going to have to import things as we go along. Message becomes equal to new label. Hello JavaFX. So we can let's import that, and be careful that you don't import from Java AWT. That's the old style user interface. It's actually the one you want from JavaFX there. Okay. So we got the label component, label node, message dot set font there. There's a set font, and we want to say that's going to be new font 100. Whoops, not 1000. Again, we need to import stuff here, and we want to make sure it's JavaFX. Set the title of the window. So stage kind of represents the window that we're dealing with. So set title, and it's just going to be hello. Oops. Okay, it would help if I typed correctly. And now we're going to create our stack pane. We'll just call that root. Like a stack of plates, one thing on top of another. New stack pane. Just use the default constructor there. Again, that's something else we're going to have to import. IDEs are wonderful, the way they just bring import statements in for you and do stuff for you. And now we can say root.get children, and then dot add the label message to the stack pane, and then stage dot set the scene. Set the scene, new scene, taking two parameters, the root and the size we want for pixels that we want for the scene, and the window is going to wrap around that. Again, we need to import there. And now we can display, raise the curtain, stage.show. Okay, so there's our program. Now we can run this now. We've got enough to run. So if I right click there, run HelloWorld main, let's see what we get. Takes a little while to fire up down here. And there it is. There's our first HelloWorld program, JavaFx style. So let's see how we add to that. Add to this, put a button on the top. That's next. Okay, so let's see how we can add a button to this. Let me just close that one down for the moment and go back to the slides. So what we want really is to have a button that looks like this. Because we're using a stack pane, it's going to sit right in the middle on the top of the label. Pretty awful user interface the way we're doing this, but it's just to prove a point really. So this is the code we're going to use to add the button. We create a button object, button node. There are other constructors we could have used, for instance, constructors that allow you to provide an image. But we're just going to provide some text there. And the other thing we're going to do is, for the button, we're going to associate a callback handler. So action handler. So setOnAction method allows us to provide a JavaFx lambda. So if you're not familiar with lambdas, it's a little bit like having a function pointer in JavaScript, for instance. This is the bit of code that's going to be called when someone clicks on the button. In this case, we've just got one statement here, but we could have multiple statements. And if you have multiple statements, then you have braces to start the block of code and to end the block of code. JavaFx lambdas avoid us having to use anonymous inner classes. I don't know if you've used anonymous inner classes, you know what I mean. But it's kind of, I don't want to look at those right now, but it's kind of like, you know, an anonymous inner class. You can say new some interface name and then provide the implementation there and then. And they tended to be used quite a lot in in Swing. So Java 8 has given us a way of just sticking the code in in a really nice fashion. The E here is just the event that represents the event. So it's a parameter. We can call that what we want, event parameter. That we can interrogate if we need to in here. We don't in this case. And this is just a little bit of syntax to show that this is the code associated with the action. If you want to find out more about JavaFx lambdas, then have a look at this link down here. So let's type this in. Okay. So we just put it after the set title here. So button red btn equals new button. Go red. Because we have to import this. And we want it to be JavaFX button, not an AWT button. And then red btn dot set on action, and then our bit of Java 8 lambda message that we already got. We have set the text fill to be red, so color dot red, predefined. And we're going to have to import that as well. Make sure you select the right one, JavaFX Scene Paint. Okay, so let's go back to the slides and see what else we need to do. So we also want to add the button to the stack pane as another child to add on to the stack. So it's going to go on top of the message. So we can do that next. Let's just type that in. So down here, root dot get children. You know, I could have, of course, put the children into a separate variable, but that's okay. And red button in there. Okay, that's all we need to do. And now if we run this again, let's see the result. So there's our button. If we click on this now, the bit of code associated with the button gets executed, which changes the text to red. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So before talking about other versions of the HelloWorld program, just a quick one on the different kinds of panes, i.e. containers that you can use. And just some examples here. The stack pane is in a way a pain to use. I mean, it's okay, but it's not appropriate for many kinds of application, only for some. So here are some other layout panes that we can use, and by the way, we can use one layout pane within another if we want to. So you can mix and match these panes, and here are just some examples. There are others too. So VBox allows you to store one component after another. So we've got single components here. So each time we add a component, it puts it under the others. HBox, horizontal box, allows us to do the same but horizontally. Tile pane, if we want everything to be the same size, then we can use the tile pane. So we've got 6 components here added, all of the same size. Grid pane is very flexible, and that's the one we're going to be using in a moment. It allows us to have components span several rows or indeed several columns if we want to, so they can be of different sizes. And border pane is used quite a lot, so the central area here expands to fill whatever space is available in the window. So this is typically where you display your main content, and then you have controlling buttons around the edge, so the north, east, south and west will have sort of control buttons or informational components. Flow pane allows the components, whatever size they are, to just flow around from left to right. And the stack pane here we've already seen. Anchor pane is quite nice. It means we can anchor components either to the edges of the window, or we can locate them, anchor them with respect to other components. So juxtapose components so that they are positioned relative to other ones. It's kind of nice. So let's go back to HelloWorld, and this is the new version of the HelloWorld we want. Text, input field, text field with a label, and a styled button. So we're going to use some CSS here to style the button and other parts of what we see in here as well. So here's the code. Again, you can get this from Pastebin if you want to. So we're going to make some changes. Still going to have a default label for the message. We're going to use a grid pane now instead of the stack pane, setting the horizontal and vertical gap between each element that we add to the grid. So 10 by 10 pixel gap between all components added. We also want a bit of padding around the outside of the grid. Well, it's sort of internal border within the grid. And to do that, we use a set padding method and an insets object. So this is top, right, bottom and left in terms of positioning. Then when we add a component to the grid, we say the position of the component, so it's position column 0, row 0 in this case, and the number of columns that the component is going to span. In this case we wanted to span, the message would span 2 columns, and then the number of rows, just 1 row. And the grid starts from position 0, 0 in the top left-hand corner of the grid, and the grid grows as we add components to it. We don't have to start from position 0 if we don't want to. We then add the grid to the scene in the normal way. So let's add this code. This is what we had before, so we're going to get rid of, to start off, the font there. And what else do we want to get rid of? The button, and get rid of all the stack pane stuff. I'm actually going to also put the scene in a separate variable. Scene equals new scene, and it's going to be grid pane, or just grid instead of root, 700 by 230. Okay, and we'll change that then to be scene like that. So we need to create the grid now. So grid pane, grid equals new grid pane. That. We've got to import it. Would help if I spelled things correctly. Okay, and then we set the gap, grid dot set h gap 10 pixels, grid dot set v gap 10 pixels, and then the insets grid dot set padding new insets. Oops, 25 by 25 by 25 by 25. Semicolon, and let's import this. So it's JavaFx geometry. That's imported. Excellent. Now we need to add the message to the grid. So grid dot add message and to the position, so 0, so column 0, row 0, 2 columns, 1 row. We're going to span. So that's everything. Now if we run this, we'll get something that's not so pretty. So we'll run this. So it's really tiny at the moment, so we obviously need to style that to make it bigger. And that's what we're going to do next. So let's go back to the slides. And to style this, we're going to use a style sheet, CSS cascading style sheet file that has an ID and 2 rules in there. So the ID is message, and we have 2 rules in here. Each rule starts for JavaFX with -fx, yeah. The font size is going to be 6ems, so it scales if we change the font size on our machine to help with partially sighted users. The font family is Arial Black. Okay, and this file will be placed under the source folder with the other Java files. So in order to refer to this ID here, this CSS ID, we associate the ID with a particular component. So the message, the label, is going to be given the ID. Don't put the hash in, just use the name there, set ID message. I mean, we can call this anything we want. Just decided to call it message. Next thing we need to do is get the set of style sheets already associated with the scene, and so there are some default style sheets that will be associated with scene, but we're going to add ours to that. And to add it, we use a bit of Java reflection code here. So this little bit of syntax here gives us the class object that represents our class, and then we can call this getResource method, which uses the Java class path to search for this file here, styling.css, as a resource, which we then turn into string form, which gets added to our set of style sheets. Okay, so let's type this in and then run this. So we'll do this just before the set scene down here. So that's message dot set ID message, and then we'll do the scene dot get style sheets, and in there we will use dot add, and then hello world dot class dot get resource, and then the name of the file styling.css. Make sure we spell it correctly, otherwise we're going to get into trouble in a moment. Styling.css dot dot to external form, and then semicolon. Okay, so we need to create the file, the CSS file, under source, so we can do that. So new, there's a style sheet there we can use on IntelliJ. Yeah, so we're going to call this styling. Okay, so there it is. Type this in, message, so minus fx minus font size is 6 m's, and minus fx minus font family that we're going to use, you can use something else if you want, is going to be Arial Black, semicolon. So that should be everything that we need. So we'll now run this and hope for the best. Okay, so it's of the right size, it's been displayed correctly. If you get an exception down here, which we don't in this case, it may be because it hasn't found the resource, that you've typed in the name wrong, or you've put the file in the wrong place. On Eclipse, when I was using Eclipse, I found that when I changed the styling rules and reran, it wouldn't pick up the new styling rules unless I rebuilt the project. So watch that one for Eclipse. I haven't actually hit that problem with IntelliJ though so far. Okay, so let's add more components to the Hello World, the text input field and so on. So I'll stop this, go back to the slides. So we want to add the text input field there, an associated label, and a button in these positions. This is the grid here. Actually, if you use grid.set grid lines visible to true, then this grid is actually displayed, which is really useful from a debugging point of view. So there's the gap, 10 pixel gap between the components, and the padding around the outside of the grid is shown here also. So again, you can get the code from Pastebin if you want, type it in, creating a button there, creating a label, setting the CSS ID associated with the label. I'm not going to set an ID for the button, I'm going to use a CSS class instead. I'll see in a moment. Creating the text field, not going to style that in any way. But I'm going to say that the maximum width of the text field is 200 pixels, so it doesn't consume the whole of the area available. And then we add the components to the grid. So we're just saying which position, so we're not actually saying how much each of these things is going to span, but we're just saying where they're starting from. So the label is going to be in position column 0, row 1, so there's column 0, row 1 there. And the button is going to be in column 1. row 2. So that's here, and it's going to be left justified by default. So let's type this in. So we could put the components up here. So let's start with a button btn n equals new button display message, and then label LBL equals new label, enter text, and then text field equals new text field. Going to have to import that. Yep, JavaFx text field, and then text field dot set max width to be 200 pixels. Okay, and then we can add to the grid. So where's our grid? Let's do it down here. Grid dot add our label first of all. Position column 1, row 1. Oh, sorry. Column 0, row 1. And grid dot add the text field to column 1, row 1, and grid dot add the button, last thing to add, at column 1, row 2. Okay, let's also highlight the grid lines so that you can see them. Grid dot set grid lines to true, so we can see what those look like. Okay, let's go back to the slides. We won't run this just yet. So what we're going to do now is add the styling for the button and the label. So we're going to type this into CSS file, and then we'll add the styling to. Oh, by the way, yeah, I was just going to say that notice here that we're using a class rather than an ID, and this will apply to all buttons within JavaFX. So there is a default class associated with each component that we use in JavaFX. Button is called the button class, so we can just restyle buttons to the way we want to have them. If we wanted to have our own class, then we could do this instead. So button.getStyleClass.add, and then whatever our class is called. But we don't need to do that because we're using the default one. So let's change the styling up here, and we'll add the extra information. So we got button label. Actually, we can get rid of this. No, we'll leave that there. So button label, btn label, and that is minus fx minus font weight is bold, minus fx font family is going to be Arial narrow, and then we'll have the class in here, button class, So it's quite a lot for this one. First of all, -fx text fill is going to be white. Color of the text is going to be white, standard color there. -fx font family is going to be Arial narrow. And then we're going to have the font weight. Is going to be bold. And then we're going to use a function, a linear gradient function, just to do something a little bit more fancy. Background color linear gradient. Yeah. And the gradients, the colors that we're going to use are from, you can change this to be something else if you want to, 61. The hexadecimal value, 2B1, gradient to a 55.8. Yeah, and you know, as I say, you could choose something other than that if you really want to. So let's go back to the code. What we have to do in here is to style the button. No, we don't. We have to set the text. Oh yes, we have to put the action on the button. Sorry. So let's do that up here. Button dot set on action, and the events we're going to be, so it's E, just like we did before, and just one line of code, message dot set text. It's going to be whatever's in the text field. Text field dot get. We're going to have to move that down, aren't we? Get text that. So we have to move this down so that we can refer to the text field. So just put that down here. Okay, so that should be fine. And let's try running this now and see what happens. Fingers crossed. So we got the grid actually displayed here. If we type something in here, hello there, then it changes the text being displayed. You can even have like that. So the grid line is just useful for debugging purposes, so most of the time you probably want to switch that off. So let's look at the switched off version of this. Notice the button's graded quite nicely down there. So we will comment this out, run again. Okay, so that looks a bit better. Okay. So just going to go back to the slides now. Let's finish up. We can have panes within panes. I just wanted to show you a simple example of that, where I'm going to create a horizontal box pane, container if you like, and I'm going to put the button within that, and then I'm going to put that pane actually within the grid at a certain position, so a pane within a pane. I'm also going to set the alignment property of the H box, horizontal box, to be pos dot bottom right instead of the default, which is left. So that means it's going to be right justified instead of the left justified that you saw previously. It was over here before. This time it's going to be right over here, as far to the right as possible, just to show that you can actually do this. So if we just go back to the code and do that, So at the top here, first of all, actually I'll switch the grid back on so that you can see that more clearly. And at the top we'll create an HBox. Let's see, where should we do that? Box. So HBox button was new HBox. I have to import that, of course. And then we'll HBox button dot get children dot add, and of course we could add lots of components to this horizontal box, but we just want the one this time just so that we can set the alignment separately from the grid. Dot set alignment, and we use a class called pos, which comes with JavaFx dot, and we want bottom right. There's bottom right. There we are. Okay. And then the only other change we need to make then is where we add the button at the moment, which is down here. We'll copy that one, comment out the old version, put in the new one. So H button instead, and that's good to go. That should be fine. Okay, so let's just stop what we had running previously and run it again. So you can see, with the grid here, that the button in its HBox the button has been pushed to the far right of the HBox. The whole of this cell here is taken up with the HBox, except that everything's been justified to the right over there. And just going back to the slides, last thing to say is that for those doing my module on Blackboard, there is a worksheet. I'll also put this worksheet with solutions up on YouTube if I can, so that you can try and create this Mac-styled calculator. If you want to do something similar to this, but using FXML instead of writing all the code yourself for the view part, then there's a nice little YouTube video that you can look at that tells you how to do that. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope that was useful.